Imagine leaving your front door expecting to see the peaceful street where you live, but finding yourself stranded instead. Grass and flowers are no longer the only things in your yard. It has a trench around it, a rough, deep scar in the ground that is shaped like a prison wall and perfectly encircles your house. Your driveway is totally blocked off. Mounds of dirt rise like barriers, and the fragrance of new dirt reaches your nostrils. Some neighbors are pretending not to notice, while others are whispering and gazing. It's drainage work, according to the HOA. However, you are aware that's a falsehood, because your covert cameras captured them surreptitiously spray painting the ground and talking their plan while they were on your property 2 nights prior. This has nothing to do with upkeep. It was a matter of terror. They wanted to break me. But what they didn't realize was that I was ready. Before I tell you how things spiraled into something so extreme, let's rewind, because it didn't start with trenches. It started small, a letter, a fine, a rule. And it snowballed until the very people who were supposed to protect the neighborhood turned it into a weapon against me. This is Tomato Tales, and today I'm sharing the story of how a neighborhood that looked perfect on the outside revealed its claws, and how one HOA tried to bury me. Literally. It was spring when I first moved in, the kind of spring that makes everything seem new. The scent of freshly cut grass and blossoming flowers permeated the crisp air. Soft pinks and whites studded the branches of the trees, which were just beginning to blossom and were swaying softly in the breeze. The entire neighborhood seemed to shine as the sun dipped low each evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The homes themselves appeared as though they were featured on a real estate magazine cover. They all lined up nicely, nearly identical but sufficiently different to give the impression of thoughtful design. It appeared as though someone had used a ruler to measure each blade of grass before trimming the lawns. The flower beds were vibrant with color. The driveways were immaculate, and even the mailboxes stood straight and consistent, as though they had been designed by an architect. The neighborhood exuded control and order in every way. It was reassuring at first. As they walked their dogs or jogged in the morning light, neighbors smiled and waved as they went by. There was a sort of upbeat soundtrack to the entire area, as kids rode their bikes in small groups down the sidewalks, their laughing resonating between the homes. It appeared secure. It appeared steady. It appeared flawless. Nearly flawless. Then I got to meet him. Mr. Lawrence, the president of the show after I moved in. He arrived a few days later, not haphazardly, not coincidentally, but purposefully, as if he were on patrol. I sensed an odd change in the atmosphere as soon as I saw him coming up the driveway. He was tall and sharply dressed, with his shirt tucked in and his tie knotted tight, even though it was just a regular weekday. He wore his hair slicked back and his shoes were immaculate. He appeared to be a respectable and professional individual who you could rely on to make things go well. His smile, however, conveyed a different message. It was courteous and well-practiced as it extended across his face, yet it stopped short of his eyes. Instead of greeting me, his eyes remained icy and analytical, as if they were researching me. In an attempt to remind me that he was in command, he held out his hand for a handshake, and when I accepted it, his hold was tight, almost too firm. He lowered his voice as if we were discussing a secret, leaning just too near. "Here, we're proud of our community standards," he remarked. His voice wasn't cordial. It wasn't friendly. It was crisp, practiced, and measured. Everyone contributes in some way. Everyone makes a contribution. That is what sustains us. I grinned, nodded, and didn't give it any attention at the time. Every neighborhood has rules, after all. Every HOA has rules. Rules are rules. That was my self-talk. However, there was a particular aspect about his delivery that I found memorable. He stressed everyone, and when he glanced at me, his eyes didn't blink. It wasn't a recommendation. It served as a warning. I was unaware at the time that the restrictions in this area were more than just rules. They weren't kind reminders or recommendations. I had previously walked straight into one of those traps. Just 2 weeks after I moved in, I received the first letter. Tucked inside my mailbox was a simple white envelope with the HOA emblem imprinted in the corner. I initially believed it to be a letter of welcome, an introductory packet including guidelines or information about local events. Something typical. However, I froze when I opened it. It wasn't a salutation. It served as a warning. My mailbox was 1 inch too tall, according to the notice. An inch. In fact, when I read it, I laughed. This must have been some sort of paperwork mix-up or clerical blunder. However, no. The letter was thorough, precise, and insisted that I fix it right away. I refrained from arguing. I didn't ask any questions. Okay, I'll just lower the mailbox, I thought. It was a simple solution, but it looked stupid, and I assumed that would be the end of it. However, I was mistaken. Another envelope showed up a few days later. This time, my mailbox wasn't the issue. My curtains were the culprit. They said it was beige, but not the authorized beige. An actual printed chart of acceptable curtain shades was attached to the notification, as though someone had taken the time to compile a catalog in order to ensure that no one was going against the rules. It didn't have my beige. I recall looking incredulously at that paper. Curtains didn't matter to anyone. They were in my house. Who could have judged the precise hue of my window curtains from outside? It was illogical. It was intimate. I chose to disregard it. I reasoned that they might go on to something else if I didn't answer. The fine arrived at that point. $50 was attached to my front door one morning in large, hostile letters. Why? 7 minutes after pickup, I had neglected to put my garbage cans by the curb. Not 7 hours. Not in a day. 7 minutes. Because it was so ridiculous that it nearly felt like a prank. I recall holding that piece of paper in my palm, shaking my head, and giggling uneasily. My trash cans were being timed by whom? Who was waiting to catch me in the act, standing at their window or sitting in their car with a stopwatch in hand? The whispers began at that moment. When the board members weren't there, neighbors would go by and speak more quietly, as if they were worried that someone could hear them. One woman blurted out, "They've chosen you," as her gaze swung to the HOA office. Another neighbor said, "Once the board determines you're a problem, they'll find something. Anything." They will not stop. The notices continued as expected. One letter after another would show up just when I felt I had done enough to please them. One more rule, one more issue, one more fine. There was no sense of community standards. It had the feel of a hunt. I reasoned that perhaps the harassment would end if I simply complied with the guidelines. I therefore fixed the mailbox. I replaced the curtains. In order to roll the cans back in as soon as the truck departed, I even programmed alarms on my phone for garbage day. But it didn't matter. The notifications continued to arrive. The penalties continued to mount. My car was parked at an angle in my own driveway, according to a letter I received one day. Angled. I stood outside and saw it from every angle. It appeared okay to me. It was straight enough for anyone else to have driven by without giving it any notice. However, it seems that the HOA considered it a crime. My grass was 1/2 inch too long, according to another message. 1/2 inch. It made no difference that I had only mowed 3 days before. I was neglecting my yard, they said. Little rules were no longer important. It has to do with control. Then it became intrusive instead of bothersome. People began to appear at my yard's border. Members of the HOA board stood there like inspectors, clipboards in hand. They would stay just long enough to annoy me while they walked around my property, taking notes. They would turn away silently if I waved or attempted to meet them, as if I were only an impediment they had to overcome rather than a fellow person. Things worsened at night. Little sounds were made at first. Outside my window, there was a shuffling of footsteps, the slight sound of gravel crunching close to my driveway. I initially convinced myself that it was animals, either raccoons or stray cats. Then I heard grumbling and whispering voices. I once noticed a flash of light sweeping across the wall of my living room when I peered through the blinds. A flashlight. It was pointed at my house by someone outside. Every morning a fresh notice would be waiting for me. Just in time, ideally situated. I felt like the object of a game, a kind of twisted cat and mouse. They wanted me to be suspicious. They wanted me worn out. They urged me to quit and leave. Admittedly, they were starting to affect me. On some evenings, I would wake up and stare at the ceiling, questioning whether it was worth it. Perhaps I should just go, cut my losses, sell the house, and flee. However, something inside of me pushed back each time that thought tried to enter my mind. A recalcitrant voice murmuring, "No, not now." Not without a struggle. I made the decision at that point that I would not merely protect myself. I intended to observe them. I went to the store and purchased 4 cameras. High resolution, motion activated, and notifications are transmitted directly to my phone. I carefully positioned them so they would blend in. One gestured toward the mailbox. One hidden away in the garden. Above the back porch is another. The driveway is being covered by the final one. The video was normal at first. Dogs are passing. Automobiles drive by. Incoming and departing neighbors. Everyday existence. However, my phone buzzed one night shortly after midnight. There was motion. I clicked the feed, launched the app, and just looked at the screen. My blood froze at what I saw. A little after midnight, my phone began to buzz. In the silence of my bedroom, the sound was abrupt and sharp. When I picked it up, the words on the screen made my heart race, but for a moment, I thought it was just another spam message. With my face illuminated by the screen's illumination, I sat up in bed. I kept my thumb over the alert. Unaware of it, I had been anticipating this moment. For days, the cameras had been recording nothing but ordinary life. I had nearly persuaded myself that I was exaggerating, that perhaps I had been seeing the torches, the footsteps, and the voices whispering in the darkness. Now, however, there was evidence. I opened the live feed after tapping the alert. Though fuzzy in the low light, the image was visible on my screen. At the border of my land, 2 figures were standing. They were both dressed in black clothing. One had what appeared to be a clipboard. The other was carrying something metallic and lengthy, possibly a measuring rod or a stake. They were looking at my house and conversing in hushed tones, indicating the floor, then turning back to my windows. In my ears, my heartbeat thudded. I remained motionless. Not even a breath left my body. One of them stooped to poke something into the ground. The other person made notes. They were carefully and methodically marking locations along my property line. Not upkeep, not a haphazard examination. There was more to this. For the remainder of the night, I watched them through my cameras as they moved in and out, vanishing and then resurfacing with further gear. Each time I thought they were gone, my phone buzzed with another alert. My front yard looked different by sunrise. I initially believed I was still dreaming. The cool morning air touched my face as soon as I went outside, but my gut twisted as I peered down. A trench was present. A long, deep hole in the ground ran the length of my property, encircling the front yard like a moat. On either side, fresh earth was heaped high like little barriers. Sections of it were marked with wooden poles and fluorescent tape, and in some spots it was so deep that you had to lean over to see the bottom. Didn't appear to be a building project. It appeared to be a warning. I stared at it as I stood in my driveway. From behind their blinds, my neighbors shared a glimpse. Some of them went outside and pretended to check the mail or water the plants, but their gazes kept straying to the trench and me. No one spoke. No one offered assistance. Later, a official notice about the trench showed up in my mailbox. According to the HOA, it was emergency drainage work done to keep the area from flooding. However, the letter was illogical. The storm drains were far from where the trench ran. It has nothing to do with anything. It simply went around my house like a scar. At that moment, it became clear. Drainage wasn't the issue here. This has nothing to do with upkeep. I was the subject of this. Their goal was to frighten me. They wanted me to feel confined, isolated, and encircled. However, they were unaware and unable to guess that I had been observing them the entire time. Everything had been captured by my cameras. Each measurement, every mutter, every action they had taken when it was dark. And the fear I had been experiencing changed into something else for the first time in weeks. Decide. At the border of my property were two figures. They were both dressed in black clothing. Another with a clipboard, the other carrying a metallic object, possibly a measuring rod or a stake. After pointing toward my house and whispering, they sunk the stake into the ground. I observed them carefully and gently marking areas throughout my yard. Not upkeep, not examination. There was more to this. As they came and went throughout the night, I remained riveted to the feed, my heart pounding. Assessing, digging, whispering. My yard looked different by sunrise. My land was bordered by a trench. Fresh mud stacked up like walls, deep and uneven. The route was bordered with wooden stakes. Drains were not connected to it. It produced no results. It just made a moat-like circle around my house. Through the curtains, neighbors peered in. While feigning to water plants, some people went outdoors and looked at me with wide, uncomfortable eyes. Nobody said anything. A message later showed up in my mailbox. The ditch was described as emergency drainage by the HOA. However, I was aware of the reality. Water wasn't the issue. It has to do with me. They were trying to trap me, all around. Scared. They were unaware that I had it all captured on camera, though, and my terror became something else for the first time. Decide. I was prepared for the HOA meeting. With papers arranged like shields, the board was seated at a large table. There was Mr. Lawrence, with the same icy gaze, flawless hair, and faultless suit. Budgets and landscaping improvements took up the whole meeting until it was finally time to discuss community concerns. I got to my feet. I said, I would like to discuss the trench. There was silence in the room. Smooth as ever, Mr. Lawrence cleared his throat. The drainage problem has to be fixed right away. Everything was carried out according to protocol. A few people nodded in agreement. I didn't sit, though. I held up my phone. Really? Since my cameras provide a different message. As the video aired, gasps could be heard. Mr. Lawrence and his board were excavating, marking, and creeping around at midnight. You can see their faces. They can be heard talking. Eyes wide, neighbors leaned in. Some of them even took their own video. Mr. Lawrence's grin fell away. It was too late when he stumbled and attempted to change the narrative. The audience burst out. Years of annoyance poured out. Every absurd regulation, every unjust fee. The HOA lost control for the first time. A vote was held at the end of the evening. Lawrence had left. They canceled the trench project. The board had to take responsibility for their misdeeds. For the first time since moving in, I felt liberated as I stepped outside into the crisp night air. However, the reality is that individuals such as Lawrence thrive on fear. When no one speaks up, they continue to have control. Their authority vanishes the instant you shine a light or provide evidence. What would you do then, if your homeowners association excavated a trench around your home? Are you going to run? Or take a stand? I am aware of my decision. Tomato Tales is this. And believe me, there is yet more to the story. It took some time for the trench to vanish. Like an open wound in the center of a picture-perfect neighborhood, the ground surrounding my house remained raw and damaged for weeks. The air, however, felt lighter. Previously avoiding my gaze, the neighbors now waved once again. Some even approached in silence, as if they were confessing. One woman looked over her shoulder and murmured, "I'm glad you spoke up." Everyone wanted to. However, no one ventured. That was the reality. Everyone had been terrified, fearful of penalties, fearful of reprisals, concerned about Mr. Lawrence. The trench had encircled the entire neighborhood, not just my house, just as real yet invisible. It had been sliced open by the cameras. Mr. Lawrence made an effort to defend himself. Letters were sent, threatened to take legal action. However, the community had stopped paying attention. Like water drained through cracked earth, his power was gone. They filled in the trench. The notifications ceased. For the first time since I moved in, I also slept with the windows open at night, so I wouldn't have to listen for outside noise like footsteps or whispering. However, the wounds persisted, not only in the earth, within me, because I've come to the realization that people would use anything to gain control, including laws, penalties, and even intimidation. They will dig trenches in your psyche as well as in your yard. They will make you doubt everything you do until you lose all sense of your independence, unless you get to your feet. The HOA didn't want me to know that secret. They lost as a result. There was more to this than a trench. It has to do with control. And once you see it, it's impossible to turn it back. And this is the reality that I want you to remember from all of this. People like the HOA, people like Mr. Lawrence, etc. Fear is what keeps them alive. Silence is what they thrive on. The way people look down, shrug, and say, "That's just the way it is what gives them power. Not the regulations they create or the penalties they impose. They keep control for as long as everyone else stays quiet. But the moment you shine a light on what they're doing, the moment you bring out the proof they never wanted anyone to see, that's the moment the mask slips. That's when their power begins to crumble, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the truth. So let me ask you, what would you do if it was you? What if your HOA, or your boss, or your so-called friend, or anyone holding authority over your life, decided to dig a trench around you? Not a trench in the dirt, but one in your freedom, in your peace, in your confidence. Would you bow your head and take it, telling yourself it's easier not to make noise? Or would you fight back, even if your voice shakes, even if you're outnumbered, even if the whole world seems against you? This isn't just a story about an HOA. It's a story about control, about fear, and about what happens when you refuse to give in. This is Tomato Tales, and trust me, the story isn't over.